And typically it's this, the woman phones the police and says, I need help now, something is wrong. And sometimes it's more complicated than it seems, in that the husband could be a mental health consumer. In other words, he's had a stressful day, as we've heard throughout this conference. There's stress, maybe with his job. He comes home and he needs help, and maybe he's also needs medication. He's not taking his medication, or he's despondent, suicidal. The spouse will phone the police and say, please come and help. And when the police arrive, they wind up being threatened by that individual because he's upset, he's emotionally charged, he's very vulnerable and very upset, and because of that, an interaction will occur with either a gun or a knife, and the policeman will wind up shooting and killing him. And again, that's a lose-lose for everyone. It's sad for the spouse who phoned for help. It's obviously terrible for the person who got shot and killed by the police, and it's terrible for the police because the police want to help people. They don't want to hurt people, but sometimes you have to use deadly force in order to save a life. So some of the cases that happen, what we know is that in Canada, and again we can extrapolate those figures, we know that this topic that is part of this conference is very, very expensive to society. It costs, in my country, $7 billion per year. Some of the economic impact is policing, healthcare, because we know those people go to hospitals. We've heard about treatment, we've heard about therapy. Again, huge costs. We've heard from the learned judge, court costs, lost wages, on and on. And we know that most of the victims, not all of them, because we know that men are victims as well, but most of the victims tend to be women and children, and it's a huge, enormous impact. So it's a very topical topic. Kudos to the conference organizers here for bringing this up, because it is something that has a huge impact upon modern society around the world, not just here. So, and we know it's costly for the woman. Typically, she has to escape harassment, change her phone number, email, legal fees, and extreme cases, we know that there are homicides that happen. In my country, 1 year, 65 homicides occurred that were deliberately due to domestic violence, and 49 of those people that were murdered were women. Obviously, there were another 16 individuals that were murdered were males, but the majority of the individuals murdered by their spouse during a domestic violence incident were women. So we see that it's quite concerning how this happens. We also know that police officers, and again, that's my background as a police officer, are sometimes victims of domestic violence. They are killed by the assailant. In other words, they will be asked to go to a call, to go to a house to help someone because of the argument that's occurring, and what will happen is the police officer will be shot and killed by the family member, or stabbed, depending on what happens. And again, as I've said, 20% of the individuals killed by the police were during a domestic violence. So it goes both ways. There is a third topic which I'm not going to talk about today, other than I was discussing with the learned judge. Apparently here in Israel, you've had a problem where off-duty individuals who have guns take them home, they get into an argument with their wife, their spouse, and they kill their spouse. That has happened a few times in America and in Canada, where a policeman has gone home and has got into a domestic argument with his wife and killed his wife. A police officer has killed his wife. Again, so there's three different phenomena here that we're talking about. Also in Israel, yes.
Police officer,
yes. Yeah, so it's a worldwide phenomenon.
His wife was a police officer.
Shot him, okay. So yeah, not just the males, but females as well. So again, we know that this is a phenomenon worldwide, not just in North America, but also around. Three different ways that, again, police are involved with domestic violence. What we find is that some of the things that happen for the police officers when they arrive at the scene, they only have a few minutes for when they initially arrive. And again, the individual doesn't like the police coming to, again, deal with this. We know that it's a huge emotional issue for both the husband and the wife. And if you look at this, we find that in some of the cases, the actual husband is trying to kill the wife when he sees the police officer arrive, because he does not want to go to jail. He does not want any consequences. And as a result, he'll take a knife. We've had 2 cases of these recently where, again, the police officer has to shoot and kill the person before he kills his wife. And that happens right in front of the police officer. So it's terrible for the police officer to see this, to do this, but again, that's what police get paid to do. Another case was, again, after they've been separated, the husband was despondent, the ex-husband, he got his wife and he threatened her with a gun, there was a chase. And another one where the individual, again, was off his medication, was losing control of himself. He actually lit the kitchen floor on fire, and when the police arrived, he attacked the police officer. So, and the woman didn't want her husband to be killed. If anything, she wanted medical help. She wanted her husband to go to the hospital, but because the things just deteriorated, he wound up being killed by the police. So these are some of the problems that I think we all face, that we need to look more at and to find out ways of reducing the violence that occurs in domestic violence, not just between husband and wife or with children, but also with police personnel. And I guess that's the point that I'm bringing here. I'm just going to talk about some of this, some of the issues and some of the variables that we talk about, just to kind of focus on this. Individuals may be irrational. We know that when we get excited, we sometimes are irrational. Sometimes we've been consuming alcohol or a substance, and we know about mental illness. When the police arrive, they're unwelcome interventionists, and they might be unaware of the content and unaware of the surroundings. And in America, and I think here to some degree, firearms are fairly prevalent. People can get rifles or handguns, and certainly in Canada we can have access to rifles, because as you know, we have bears, as I showed you earlier. We have lots of big bears around there. So, what do we need to do? What can we all do better? Is to slow things down and to talk, as opposed to being physical. And we know as police officers that most police officers can attend these calls and can resolve them safely without any violence. And what we can use are, again, communication, time, take time, slow things down, keep some distance between people, because we know when we get close to people, we get even more angry. So again, physical barriers if we can. And as police officers, we know that we have access to pepper spray, tasers, and beanbags, and those things. And the other thing that we can do from a police perspective, and I'm part of some of the training that occurs in my area, in the Vancouver area, is we talk about call screening, finding out information ahead of time before the police arrive so they can do a better job and to slow things down, increase training and knowledge, and also obviously enhance tactics so the police officers can get into the scene safely without confronting the person, because if they confront him, that's when he pulls out the knife sometimes and puts it against the woman's throat, or that's when he attacks the officer. So we need enhanced tactics, and we also need some access to less lethal weapons or options. So again, just some simple strategy just to wrap up is the contact officer needs to, again, talk to the individual, respond to the emotions that are going on. And I think we can all do this when we're dealing with domestic violence. And also use maybe a little bit of psychology to work towards a peaceful resolution. The other person who's there can be someone who's trained to make sure things are safe. So we need someone to do the talking, the mediation, and to, again, bring things down from being so upset. And then someone else who is actually there in case they have to use a taser or, heaven forbid, have to use a handgun, depending on the circumstances. But you need two people to respond to these. And what do we talk about? We talk about willing to listen, willing to understand, treating all people with respect, males and females, not one side, and having empathy for the individual and their situation, whatever that is. And sometimes we don't do that as individuals. I think sometimes we're too focused on achieving our own personal goals and not listening to the other person tell their story. So we're trying to incorporate that into policing, and we call it crisis intervention. So whether the person is upset, whether they're on drugs or whether they're mentally ill, they're suicidal, despondent, again, we would implement some of these strategies to, again, resolve the situation. So just quickly, that's what it looks like. It's a stairway of negotiations, and that was brought up earlier this morning. We talked about negotiations and understanding, empathy, rapport, influence, and hopefully we can change the behavior, whatever it is, when the police arrive on the scene so that we can safely resolve the incident without using guns. And that's the key, is not to shoot and kill people, but to safely reduce the incidents and get them out of there. What you see in Canada is a reluctance to use deadly force, and you're seeing in this case where rather than, even though they had the lethal means to shoot and kill this person, he had a knife, he's out in the public fair. What they did was they took a bit of time, talked, and they used tactical means, maybe not official tactical means, but they used tactical means. So anyways, I'll stop there and I'll just leave my name and contact there. Thank you.